Hi everyone, my name is Benjamin Selby and today I'm going to be showing you how to create photomechanically carved Mokuhanga. We're going to be using a laser engraver to carve both halftone and color blocks that we're then going to print using normal water-based woodblock printing techniques. I'm fairly new to the world of Mokuhanga myself, having only been briefly introduced to it a few years ago, and I'm just now getting back into it. But I'm really excited to share with you today this process that I've been working on. The first crucial step in the process is picking an image that will give you the highest likelihood of success. A lot of it will be trial and error to figure out what will work best with the laser engraving machine you have access to, but there are some general guidelines for success. Ideally, an image should have a strong figure, higher contrast, limited midtones, and a relatively well-balanced amount of light and dark values. Unless you're using an extremely dense, tightly grained wood and are using a specialty laser system, anticipate losing some detail due to the coarseness of the required halftone and a loss of lighter values through the printing process. This will be the image we're going to use today. As you can see, the white feathers of the egret create a strong contrast and clearly defined figure. In addition, the amount and density of shadows and highlights within the grass will help compensate for a loss of detail along the way. Now that we have our image chosen, I will go ahead and open it in Photoshop. The first thing you're going to want to do is check your image size and resolution. I recommend working at a resolution of 720 so that we lose as little detail as possible along the way. Now we're going to want to go ahead and turn it into a halftone, so we'll go to Image, Mode, Grayscale, Image, Mode, Bitmap. We'll want to leave our output resolution at 720. We'll be using a halftone screen. Now this next step is very crucial and will strongly influence the outcome of your final image. Our ultimate goal is to carve very tiny halftone dots or lines out of our block with the laser, but we're limited by several factors. If we set our dots too small, the laser could overcarve them, leaving them deeper than the surface of the block. They could become too fragile, and too fine of details tends to trap excess pigment. If our halftone dots are too large, we might not be able to retain as much information as we want in smaller images. Through all of my experimentation on multiple laser systems, I've found that a frequency of between 35 to 75 works best. For this image today, we'll be using a frequency of 55, an angle of 45, and round for our shape. I've found that round and line tend to work the best as they don't trap as much pigment in the recesses. Once we have our settings in, we'll just hit OK. And as you can see, we've created a halftone. Now we have our halftone, but most laser systems only read RGB colors, so we need to turn it into an RGB image. To do that, we'll just go to Image, Mode, Grayscale, a size ratio of 1, Image, Mode, RGB color. Now our image is almost ready at this point, but I recommend going ahead and saving a copy of this in case you want to add any color layers later on. So I'll go ahead and save it as a JPEG. At the highest quality possible. Now that we have our image saved, there's a few more things we have to do and it'll be ready for the laser. Anything that the laser sees as black, it's going to carve away. Anything that's white, it's going to leave. We want to print the dots as we see them now, so we're going to go ahead and invert the image. In order to do that, just go to Image, Adjustments, Invert. And as with any relief process, we need to flip our image. So we'll go to Image, Rotation, Flip horizontally. One of the amazing benefits of the laser is the ability to cut super accurate registration. So in order to do that, we're going to create a black border around our image, the same exact size as our paper. When the laser sees that, it'll carve it away, leaving us perfect edges. The way I like to do that is go ahead and go to View, New Guide Layout, Set your gutters to 0, the number of columns to 1, rows to 1, hit OK, and now you've created your first guidelines around this image. Now I'm going to go ahead and change my canvas size to make it the same size as my paper. Go to Image, Canvas Size, 6 inches by 11 inches. And then I'll go ahead and set up new guides the same as I did last time. Now we have perfect guides where our borders are. Now I'll use the selection tool to go ahead and select our borders. And fill those borders in with the paint bucket tool with pure RGB black. Go ahead and clear the guidelines. And now we'll save this one more time. While I demonstrated this in Photoshop, it doesn't necessarily matter what software you're using. As long as it is a JPEG and RGB black, virtually any laser system will be able to read it. While I don't have time to show you in detail in this demonstration, I've also created a series of color layers which we'll also be printing. As you can see in this file, I have my 3 separate color layers along with my halftone image. When you're ready to turn your color layers into laser files, you just need to isolate them and turn them into solid black, the same as your halftone. You just don't need to turn it into a halftone first. The easiest way is just go to Image, Adjustment, Threshold, bring the slider up till it's black, then you would just flip it, invert it, and add your borders the same as with your halftone. The next step I'll be showing you is the actual laser engraving. This is the laser engraver we have here at the ASU Graduate Studios. It's a Boss 150 watt laser. The 2 primary ways we control the laser are through this computer here, from which we send files, and in the actual built-in control panel on the laser itself. Here you can see the bed where I've already placed our block. And in the back of the machine is the actual laser that fires a beam through a set of mirrors down through this lens assembly right here. When the laser is actually running, this lens assembly will pass back and forth as the laser pulses on and off. And you can also see that the bed itself raises up and down in order to put the material in proper focal distance. To send our file over to the laser, the first thing we need to do is open it up in Lightburn. Lightburn is a very common software for many different platforms, but even if your laser doesn't use Lightburn, many of the settings will still be the same or similar. Let's go ahead and check our settings under the Cuts and Layers tab. For a 150 watt laser engraving into cherrywood, I recommend setting the speed to 350, the power to 20, make sure the output is on, make sure the air assist is on, set your file to 720 dpi, the same as our input, the image mode to threshold, because we've already created our own halftone, we don't need the laser to. Double check our settings, and now that we're ready to send the file over to the laser, we just go to the laser tab and hit send. Then give it a name and hit OK. Now that the file has been sent over to the laser, we need to adjust our material to make sure the image is in the center of it. In order to do that, we can use this framing tool to outline where the image will be. If it's not centered, just move the material around until it's centered. This laser has a built-in autofocus, so we'll use that to adjust the material distance from the lens. All that's left to do is close the lid and hit start. The laser engraving process is fairly slow, so I've sped most of this up, but this is the actual speed the laser goes. In a moment, you'll see that I've sent additional files through to carve the borders even deeper. This is the first color block. It's the orange beak of the egret. I've cut out a lot of the unnecessary image in order to speed up the laser engraving process pretty considerably. You can also lower the resolution on the color blocks to 300 to speed up the process additionally. The key block took approximately 3 hours to carve, while these color layers took about an hour and a half each. On the left is the key block, on the right is the beak, there's our sidewalk layer, and there's the grass layer. Even though the laser has done most of the work for us, we still need to do some clearing by hand. The texture of laser engraved wood is very coarse and will cause pigment and paste to build up. When you're carving, try not to get too close to the edges, as laser engraved wood tends to be a little bit more brittle and can easily chip. Although it is not necessary, after carving your blocks, I recommend rinsing off the residue. I've noticed particularly on the halftone block that the residue creates little bubbles, trapping pigment between the dots. Choosing the right paper is another important step in this process. While it is possible to print with handmade papers, I've found it fairly difficult. The best results I've had are with machine-made papers due to their perfect consistency and flatness. The paper we're using today is Shin Torinoko. Printing the color blocks is basically the same as printing hand-carved blocks. You just have to be a little more careful about watching for pigment and paste building up along the edges. For the color layers, I'm using Aqua liquid pigments. The ink that I have found to work best with these halftone key blocks is Yasutomo Liquid Sumi. When first printing, I like to go ahead and mist the block a little bit to go ahead and get some moisture into it, but be careful about oversaturating particular areas. Inking the block is definitely a little bit different than normal. After a lot of trial and error, I figured out the best method is to go ahead and apply ink to the brush first and then slowly apply it to the block. If you apply it directly to the block, it very quickly builds up in between the tiny dots and ends up oversaturating your paper. You will very quickly end up with a splotchy, uneven print. Though you do have to be careful about not applying too much ink to the brush. I also recommend going ahead and doing several proofs on newsprint to help build up the ink some first. As you'll notice later on, it takes about 10 prints until the ink starts staying really consistent. One thing you might not have expected is you actually need to use a fairly coarse baren and quite a bit of pressure. Although we are printing such tiny, fine details, they are so dense and cover such a large area, it just requires a lot of pressure. That's why I recommend working on harder wood like cherry. I have experimented with softer woods like basswood and sheena, but the tiny little dots just crush under the pressure needed to print. Although you can create very coarse large dot halftones on softer wood. Comparing the first print and the 12th print side by side, we can see how more details slowly start to appear. Further along in the printing run, it can start to pick up too much information from around those finer details. If it does start to do that, you can just go in and hand carve them away. Although I don't have time to talk about it in more detail in this demonstration, I wanted to make sure to give credit to all the artists that have inspired me over the last year. It amazes me how many creative and innovative ways they've found to incorporate digital and/or photographic technologies into Mokuhanga. Thank you so much to everybody that organized the conference this year. I can't imagine how much hard work, dedication, and patience it took. And thank you to everyone who took the time to watch my demo. I hope you enjoyed it, and feel free to reach out to talk or ask questions anytime.